It's an Archaeodeath monthly review with Professor Howard Williams.
So, Archaeodeath fans, this is my third monthly review. So, my YouTube channel, Archaeodeath, has been a supplement to my long-standing blog, my WordPress blog site called Archaeodeath, which has been running since 2013. I'm Professor Howard Williams. I work at the University of Chester, where I teach research and generally mooch around doing a bit of scholarship on the archaeology of death and memory, medieval archaeology, contemporary archaeology, public archaeology, and much more besides. And I try to use the YouTube channel and my blog as modes of public engagement to disseminate and communicate within academia, but also beyond, I'd like to think, about some of the research I'm doing, some of the teaching I'm doing, some of the ideas that I'm working with. And so this month, I want to sort of really consolidate this approach of doing the videos, doing the blogs, and then doing a monthly roundup so that those of you who find it difficult to follow all the things I've been up to, and I have been told recently that I perhaps blog and vlog way too much for what is normal and safe and hygienic and sane, maybe this serves as a useful sort of review for you. Now, so I want to start off by looking at the YouTube videos. I then want to move forward and look at some of the blogs I've done in the last month, and there's some overlap between the videos and the blogs. And then I want to talk about some more broader issues that have come to the fore in the last month about public engagement in relation to my research or me and my position out there in social media. So let's start off with a quick recap of my videos that I've been doing on the YouTube channel. Now, first of all, I would say that at the very end of May, I don't know if I covered it in my last video because it came, I think, maybe at the same time or just after, I did a video about Offarsdyke at Brumbo in Wrexham Borough, this post-industrial village, and the fact that it's a very strategic location where Offarsdyke not only reaches heights to dominate landscape to the west, but also communicate to the east. And it's a point where Offarsdyke changes direction and from heading north-south to heading northwest southeast as it skirts around the western side of Hope Mountain. Then I looked at a bit of contemporary archaeology of death and memory. I looked at how the Gresford mining disaster has been memorialized, and I did a video at the Gresford Mining Disaster Memorial and talked about the ways in which we commemorate disasters in the 20th and early 21st century landscape. And of course, mining disasters are a particularly powerful and evocative form of disaster. Not only the scale of the loss of life, the communities affected, but also the fact that in this case, many of the bodies could never be recovered and are entombed beneath the landscape where the memorial resides. So it's a cenotaph, but a cenotaph where the bodies are not in a Flanders field or scattered beneath the North Atlantic, as many war memorials evoke. But the landscape is immediate. The bodies are there, close by, and that gives it a different dimension. So I talk about the materiality of the monument, the form of the monument, the use of a wheel, and the ancillary benches and other memorials that are crewed around it. So I think put those together, I think I start off by looking at an early medieval monument, an Anglo-Saxon monument, a great linear earthwork, and then I jump to the 20th century and deal with a mining disaster memorial. Follow on from that, I look at one of the aspects that's very important for my research on the archaeology of death and burial, and that's the ethics of what we do. And that takes many forms. There's the ethics of should we and how should we dig up the dead, and also how we then communicate those stories, curate and display human remains, rebury where appropriate. But there's also broader ethical issues surrounding the practice and politics of mortuary archaeology, of how the dead have residences in our society. And I use one case study based on a 2013 blog I did to address that in my video. What is truly wrong about was it truly wrong to dig up Richard III? This is relating to the University of Leicester focus project to excavate, and they found, I don't think they even expected to find, but they did find the body of identified as the interment at Leicester Greyfriars of Richard III following the Battle of Bosworth. So I talk about some critical comments about the mentality of the broader public engagement and the resonances and the conflict over where the burial of the body should be reinterred, whether it goes to York or it stays in Leicester. All of this I suggested was perhaps a bit of proto-Brexit manifestations of English localism, um, which were played out and gobbled up by the media. There was an international element to it as well. But I talk about some of the politics surrounding the excavation of Richard III, and I don't suggest he should not have been excavated, but I talk critically about how many archaeological projects struggle with dealing with the sort of royal necrophilia of people who love royalty and love dead royals, and the cult of celebrity that can surround both corpses that can be attributed with a human personality, a named individual, or where we can actually concoct identities for them, and particularly the emphasis we put on the elite and royalty is both it's a good way of public engagement, but it also carries baggage with it. My next video looks at envisioning cremation. Now, one of my expertise is looking at cremation practices, past and present. And in that video, I take you on a journey looking at some work I've done, evaluating how early Anglo-Saxon, 5th to 7th century AD, cremation practices are reconstructed in artists' envisionings of cremation procedures. And there's actually very few, and of those that are few, they all have problems with them. And I also talk about the work I did with Aaron Watson. Dr. Aaron Watson is an archaeological illustrator and an archaeologist, and he's done a lot of important public engagement work. And he did some, about 15 years ago, we did some designed, and his art and my ideas sort of combined to create some visuals of early Anglo-Saxon cremation practices, and they're not ideal in any regard. There's many things that I would do differently now, but they have joined a very small number that are out there and that try to portray what cremation practices were about in that period. And I think there's much more we need to do moving forward. Not exactly the most exciting of topics, but I also do an introduction to academic peer review and academic publishing with an archaeological angle to it. My experiences as an editor of many books and of journals, I give you my take on peer review. Now, most recently, I pulled together some of my TikTok videos to do a compilation on the topic of defend the memorials or topple the racists, looking at the last month has seen, following the tragic death of George Floyd, a new stage in the Black Lives Matters movement, and lots of pushback, as the terms now have got it, or ignorance, but also reactionary, whataboutery, and some, shall we say, claims to the Black Lives Matters movement want to topple our entire society and perhaps also destroy its many well-loved statues and monuments. And I try to pull that apart in a sense. I can't look at all the issues, but I look at one or two aspects of that debate, that public debate that's emerged, and how it relates to my research in those series of videos. And that came out 5 days ago from time I'm filming now. So the last month I've been busy on YouTube, and I should also say that that has been complemented with a whole series of my WordPress blog posts. And I've tried to do a lot in this month about the lockdown situation, the pandemic lockdown situation we find ourselves in June 2020. The first blog of the month looked at the viral archive. Now, this is a project by other people, but when the BBC News story came out, I was very flattered and honoured to be associated with it, and to be featured as part of their work to archive the various aspects of the lockdown, the material cultures and the monuments, the art and the signage associated with our lockdown world. I then returned to the topic of lapidarium, mortuary lapidarium, and how 19th and early 20th century gravestones are often rearranged into assemblages within disused chapel graveyards and churchyards. And I looked at an example of Breaks Chapel in Pentre Broughton, or Moss actually, in Wrexham, and how the now dismantled chapel across the road is accompanied by a church, a graveyard, where the gravestones have all been removed to make it easier for mowing and maintaining the space, and have been put into this pavement. So it's another example of a mortuary lapidarium. And for the first time, I dared to go further and to actually suggest a typology for mortuary lapidaria: those on pathways and their subsections, mural lapidaria, and assembled lapidaria. That's my provisional typology, and archaeologists like typology, some of them anyway, as my typology for mortuary lapidaria of reused and rearranged gravestones. So we move from modern material cultures commemorating or celebrating the work of key workers, and at this time of death, and exceptional numbers of death above the average, and all manner of challenges facing society, economic, social, religious as well. I then look at collecting gravestones. I then look at the phenomenon of how our stations and our landscape are part of a kind of a mortuary exchange still going on. Our railway heritage sites, and also our actual live railways, as it were, sort of actual, used for commuting and for travel, are incorporated into a mortuary exchange, that people adopt monuments and they can adopt stations. And I talk about this Academia station as one example, very close to me, of a Arriva Trains Wales adopt a station scheme. So that's an interesting example of contemporary archaeologies of memory, how parts of our daily lives can be integrated into memorialisation, in this case of one individual in loving memory of William John Mathers, who died only recently in 2016. So beyond the cemetery, memorialisation, I think that's a good example of. I then go back to Breaks Chapel in Pentre Broughton, and I talk about the fact that the wall around the block of flats that's been built over the chapel contains the original foundation stone, and the um, Psalm 76, verse 2. I then take forward that, and I do a post about the Gresford mining disaster memorial linked to my YouTube channel, but that's just to show you it in case you didn't know what it looked like. And then I look at material cultures of lockdown, before the lockdown, and I look at how during the lockdown I've been traversing spaces I'm very well familiar with in my environs, but I've also been coming across many abandoned places. Now, these are not new, they've already been there, and I just reflect on the fact that we find ourselves in a very different social and spatial environment now, with the lockdown, of places denoted as no longer enter parks, no longer able to access spaces. But we already were living in a lockdown landscape of buildings in limbo, in slow decay, as in this chapel, this another chapel, another chapel, and another chapel. We live in a landscape with abandoned houses, of people with abandoned cars and vans in their drives, of tractors that are never going to move again, and diggers, of abandoned and ruined industrial heritage sites. This is the Brumbell Steelworks, which they're hoping to redevelop, and also a host of other landscapes and environments. So I also talk about the great case study of this random digger that sits amidst very high quality, well, high priced houses anyway, local to me, and seems to be in a sort of limbo, slowly decaying and rusting away in plain sight of modern houses, but seemingly no one owns this plot of land, and it's going away. And I also love this bit of wall, which is a bit of a, though they've obviously, the wall collapsed, they've cleared the rubble, but they haven't rebuilt the wall. And you can see in the section here the sort of the bowing of the wall from the pressure of the soil behind. A wonderful bit of archaeology there in plain sight. Dilapidated signs, burnt out cars. I live in a lovely area actually. This is exceptional, but random sofas and farmyard, dumps of old lawn mowers. The whole rich landscape of lockdown and limbo, shall we say. I then look at 2 medieval funerary fragments that never before recorded, and never before discussed properly by archaeologists. Although Brian and Moira Gittos recently published a description of this. These are the first photographs that have appeared in an academic context of discussion from Hope Church. This is on the south wall of the Hope Church, so check those out if you're up in Hope in Flintshire. I then jumped to my interest in pop culture and looked at season 4, and I've gone through many blog posts, seasons 1 to 3, but I finally got to season 4 of The Last Kingdom. I'm not really a fan of The Last Kingdom, and it irks me intensely, but I was delighted to see that Offa's Dyke makes an appearance. They don't actually go to Offa's Dyke, which in the very end of the 9th century, early 10th century context is already presumably over 100, 120 years old. We don't go to Offa's Dyke, but we have here Haldar in his court in Deheubarth talking about Offa's Dyke and giving his own early 10th century take on Offa, if you are to believe this scene. The Welsh all wear red for some reason. We never find out why. Anyway, I then go back to lockdown landscapes. I've been brewing this post for 3 months, and this is my compilation of visuals of the different signs and materialities of lockdown landscapes. Closed signs, official, unofficial, cemetery signs. Have a look at that if you can, because I've tried to sort of do my own take on what it all means, and I create a typology again of different kinds of lockdown materialities and spatialities. And then I take on more lockdown contemporary archaeology, shrines of gratitude, looking at this wonderful shrine in Moss Valley, where there's painted stones and painted other materials have encrusted and been embedded into every facet of this broken tree stump. And so that's a really good example of one feature of our landscape during lockdown: are the shrines, the monuments to gratitude, material cultures of gratitude, if you like. And another version of that, which is different because it's cumulative, is the COVID-19 snake, Alan the snake, at Alan Waters Country Park in Wrexham. And this is Alan the snake, and he snaked on. I've done TikToks about him and videos, and he's wonderful. And he's growing all the time, and many innovative visual painted pebbles and so on. So as I said, a lot of my posts this month have been about contemporary archaeologies, the lockdown situation. Yep. So the the Anglo-Saxon debate. It's not a debate, actually. It's never been a debate. It's been a lot of posturing and um, loud noises being made and very little conversation or discussion at all. But I have to be polite and call it a debate. Has been going on since September at least last year, and I decided to, back in the late winter, early spring, to write a piece for a arts and culture magazine, Aeon, about the Anglo-Saxon archaeology for all. And so I did a little blog post about that issue and what I say and some of my current reflections on that debate, which has led to some quite heated comments aimed at me on social media, and I'll come back to that in a little while. I then have another blog post about the video Envisioning the Dead. So there's a link up between the blog and the website, and I think that's the blog and the YouTube channel. And then I have Lockdown Before the Lockdown 2, which is looking at various different kinds of private property sign and how restrictions are denoted in the landscape. Please do not feed the horses. Please do not go along here. Private land. Put dogs on leads. This is kind of our regulatory archaeology, the archaeology of rules and regulations in our landscape. And so I think that's an interesting aspect of contemporary archaeology, not exactly mortuary or funerary or memorial practice, but it's part of the way our landscape is coded to regulate where we go. where does that leave me? My 15th blog post. And I've tried to keep doing 15 blog posts every month. Is on early medieval public archaeology. Now, my latest book, Digging into the Dark Ages, is out with Archaeopress, and you can download it for free and has lots of interesting papers. It's the first ever book looking at the public archaeology of the early Middle Ages, of the Dark Ages. And the wonderful Rosie at History A invited me to do a podcast with her, and so I'm very pleased and proud to be supporting her ongoing work as a podcaster and to share some of my thinking on the book and the broader issues surrounding it, which of course links and synergizes with the Anglo-Saxon debate about what we do in public context, how we communicate the past, how do we challenge preconceived ideas, and how do we counter extremist narratives. So you can read up about that. So I've now gone through and reviewed my videos and my blogs. And I must also say, please do check out my TikTok account, where I have there's pictures of baby ducks, there's videos of baby ducks and grass and heavy metal ladybirds and all sorts of things like that. Vangelis snails, you know, it's all there. Alpacas, you know, bees, but also archaeology and occasional discussions of tombs and monuments and toppled the racist, as I said. I originally did on TikTok as small videos, and then I've transposed or edited together into a YouTube video. So in your own time, have a look through my various attempts at TikToking for what they're worth. I've got over 264 followers on TikTok, 194 on YouTube. I'm not aiming to be a big superstar here, but I'm really pleased there was an audience, different audiences via these two video channels where, I 3 months ago I hadn't even thought about I hadn't had thought about it, but I hadn't really had the guts to take this further and do these activities. But I want to tell you now a little bit about some of the other things I've been doing in the last month. As you know, I'm working hard with my doctoral researcher and Herefordshire's HER officer, Liam Delaney, to edit the second volume of the Offa's Dyke Journal. Now, volume 1 came out in 2019 and is available free online through the Offa's Dyke Journal website, and also you can buy the first copy from Archaeopress. But the second volume we launched, the launch of it coincided with the start of this YouTube channel. And here's volume 2's cover, which I'm very pleased with, using the art granted to us for use by the Offa's Dyke Association. And we've published in April the first paper to appear by Tim Maylim. It's a republication of a 2007 publication, Grimsditch, Wansdyke and the Ancient Highways of England, Linear Monuments and Political Control. Well, this month we've published the second piece, which is by Keith Fitzpatrick Matthews, and it's on a really important topic. It's about the pseudo-archaeology, the false archaeology, the fantasies about linear monuments, about dykes, and particularly about Offa's Dyke and Watts Dyke. And it's called the Wall of Severus, in quotation marks, because it's not the Wall of Severus. Offa's Dyke is not a Roman monument. But he's using that and critiquing the assumptions behind their works. And pseudo-archaeology in the West Mercian Dyke. So I'm very pleased and proud that one of the things I've been working on during lockdown is keep hammering away, editing and working with authors to get new research out. And I'm very pleased and proud that that has come out, and I'll be doing a blog post promoting that very soon. Now, that's just to give you a flavour of what I've been doing. I've also been working on an edited book with two former students, one current student, one former student, Pauline Clark, who edited the last book with me. I'm working with her again on the 4th University of Chester conference, archaeology student conference proceedings, the public archaeology of frontiers and borderlands, as well as one of the students who presented at that conference, Kieran Gleave. So we're continuing work editing that, and we've actually got all the papers in now. It's very exciting. So we're doing a lot of work on that book. That's going to come out this year. So we've got the journal coming out, that book coming out. It's the lockdown has been a busy time for me. I haven't been able to sit around at home doing lots of work. I've been very busy with other things, but I have been busy keeping going with those projects I've already committed to. More on that later on. So that's all positive news of what I've been doing. There are some other things I would like to talk about, though, relating to how we, the things I've been up to during this last month, and particularly related to how we, or how I, engage in contemporary issues, because I don't blog about every newsworthy story and I don't comment on every new controversial debate, but I do want to sort of tackle a few aspects of what I've been saying publicly in the last month about news stories. Now, a month is a long time in social media archaeology, and there are so many issues that I can't address, and I really should in the context of this video, trying to round up the last month. But I want to start with one point, and that is that this month we lost a early medieval archaeologist who sadly I only met once, but who has been working on a whole range of different aspects of the archaeology of early medieval northern Britain. That is Dr. Oliver O'Grady. And I just want to take a moment to pay my respects to him and pass on my condolences to his loved ones and his friends and family for the terrible loss they must have suffered. Someone to have died so unexpectedly and so young, when in the middle of this pandemic background, when so many people are losing loved ones, and it's hits home when there is someone within the archaeological community who has passed away. Other issues that I've commented on over the last month include the fact that we've seen some shocking examples of poor scholarship exhibited within um, both academic publications and the public dissemination of them. One particular case I could not help but comment on as a leading Oxford University-based journal, um, which takes a lot of material for medieval studies, got called out for publishing a near identical subject twice, which reflects very poorly on the journal and also casts a massive question mark over the behaviours of a character who's already been established as someone with questionable behaviours in social media. But I didn't expect. While at one level I'm not surprised, and I didn't expect it to be exhibited in such a stark way within academic work. We've also seen another aspect which I really haven't commented on too much, but of taking down of a scholarship of someone who is published on on medieval controversial topic and tried to equate it to the present day, and was called out and taken down in a very public way on social media in the last month. Um, Part of this I have a lot of sympathies for. I don't feel social media should be a place where people should be called out and taken down and cancelled. And but given that the behaviours of these two characters, the one who's a replicator of other people's work and the other one who has been shown as an incredibly poor scholar in some of their writing online in popular magazines, so some of their behaviour is all about combating and denouncing and cancelling other people. It's what goes around comes around seems to be the appropriate phrase I'm looking for. It's very sad, but it seems to be that a small section of particularly younger scholars seem to not have appropriate measures and uh, common sense when dealing with social media. And I think this is an issue we're going to have to come back to again and again in the way we behave towards each other and towards the broader public in our social media activity. So that's been going on. Talking of which, I waded in on another pairing of public, sort of celebrity historians whose opinions I didn't quite agree with on two issues. One, I had a disagreement over a post by Tom Holland, someone I agree with on other issues, but on this particular issue, I found myself in a position with, namely, white lives don't matter as white lives, quote by Professor Priyagopal of the University of Cambridge. And is this the kind of comment that is widely understood, or is it ripe for misuse or misunderstanding? Is that the fault of the person who said it, in other words, Priyagopal, or is this um, bigots, edgelords wishing to make something out of her comments? Is this because she's trying to assume everyone has academic knowledge of her language, her specialist academic language, or is she deliberately playing to audiences? I didn't get into all of that, but I did question whether it's fair to say that she courted controversy in that particular instance, and in that particular context of white lives don't matter as white lives. Very controversial topic, and perhaps I shouldn't have said anything at all. Another one was TV historian and archaeologist Neil Oliver, who had a Twitter moment, a Twitter moment of madness. One could almost say, if that's unfair. I'm sorry, but I think it is a pretty strange thing to say. Don't go to university, he asserted, and qualified that with get an honest job and learn about the past and collect books. In other words, saying don't go to university to study the past, generate an interest in another way. Now, I would agree with him that just because you're passionate about the past, you shouldn't necessarily go to university to pursue that. Do something else if you like. But the idea wrapped into that tweet, a lot of people took offence, and I must say, in the current climate where academics seem to be trying to engage on social media, and we don't get it always right, and we don't get it spot on. Just that slagging off of universities, that anti-intellectual culture, is being, is being fostered by celebrity historians and archaeologists who want to just take a shot at those at universities. Yeah, we've been working through the lockdown. We haven't had holiday or beyond annual leave. We haven't had furlough. We've been working to teach online, learning how to teach online, learning how to do administration online, continuing with our research. Many of us had been striking earlier this year. This was so unwelcome, and I did get angry on social media about that. So, some academic replication, some poor scholarship being focus of controversy in the last month. The Priagopal Tom Holland dimension I waded in on and perhaps regret doing so, and the Neil Oliver comment. Another one I want to share with you because it's more mortuary archaeology relates to this chain. Dr. Thomas Smallboy from he's a Danish scholar, medievalist, says this is a rare example of a slave collar, probably of the Viking Age. The slave trade was important for the Vikings, and it was probably a large part of the economy. It is unfortunately rarely mentioned in textbooks and museums, although that is changing. And his comment was really about how we communicate something that's nearly invisible in those centuries. And this is particularly pertinent in the context of Black Lives Matter. It's particularly sensitive at the moment, and I shared something in relation to that, a tweet where I said, I regard this as one of the most evocative uses of human remains in a European museum. The skull with perimortem sharp force trauma is from Dublin, the chain from County Roscommon. So this is a display at the National Museum of Ireland where we have a long slave chain and a human skull has been placed in that chain, sort of evoking the enslavement of that individual, a person who died a violent death. Now, we don't know whether this skull is of a slave at all. These artifacts are from different sites. A whole body is not being displayed because a whole body wasn't found. The skull may have been displayed or circulated. And I must admit, when I saw this in the museum in Dublin last year, I was going to actually write a critical comment about this because there's two ethical issues here: disassociating material from context, and secondly, of contriving a context from materials from different sites. And for me, this display is guilty of both those things. And yet, equally, one has to say, this display does a really powerful job. And so I thought this was going to kick off because a lot of people go, we shouldn't use human remains in tweets or any kind of public engagement activity at all. It's disrespectful to the ancestors. And I must admit I am sensitive to that, and I try to reduce. I don't tweet and use images of the dead unless I need to make a point on social media. And yet I feel it has an educational value, and this is a good example. Now, I actually then backtracked and said, actually, I have problems with this display, but a lot of people like that, and appreciated why I shared it in the context of current debates about slavery, its history, and its invisibility in many narratives and museum displays. So I think people took it in the spirit of what I was tending to, and I think it made a point. But I'm not comfortable with this display, not because it shows slavery, but because of that decontextualization and false recontextualization of human remains in relation to artifacts. And yet it tells a powerful story. And this is the problem with human remains on display: is one person's disrespect is another person's deep respect. And I think this display encapsulates both those aspects. So I don't have the only opinion on this. I was just these are just some immediate thoughts I had last year in September 2019 when I saw this display, and haven't blogged about yet, but I've been harbouring as something I want to really talk about at some point. So that's another thing I wanted to flag up in my monthly review. Now, the seventh thing I want to talk about is that actually I had another social media little disagreement with another archaeologist in this last month, in relation to my post, a blog post I did. You can guess which one it was, whose response was that I shouldn't be talking about race and ethnicity in the archaeological record and how we interpret that and what we call that at a time when Black Lives Matter is in the headlines. That was his first point, and almost like chastising for me for posting about uh, the archaeology and race, archaeology and ethnicity at this time. And my response is, you crazy. Not only is the Black Lives New movement hardly created in the last month, it's hardly a new thing, but the whole point about that movement, whatever your view on its details is that we should be absolutely foregrounding debates about race, ethnicity, past and present, both in our understanding of past societies and the stories we tell about it, the practitioners, and the audiences that we're speaking to. So for me to say that, I did actually delay posting because the Aeon article on Anglo-Saxons, you can guess what it's about, did come out, I think, inappropriately close to the Black Lives Matter, protests immediately after the death of George Floyd. And I felt this was not the time to put out my blog. Hey, look, guys, I've got this out. So I didn't. I delayed it 2 weeks. So I was surprised to get that response. So I responded with I waited 2 weeks, and this is absolutely the time to be discussing these issues. He then said the fact that I've had to write multiple posts about this issue shows I'm wrong. Well, I've posted 9, I think now, blog posts about the Anglo-Saxons over 9 months. That's hardly a few were concentrated towards the start, but that's hardly a lot. I've got a YouTube video coming out about some of the issues, but it's hardly as if it's my only topic of conversation. At the same time, I've published over 150 blog posts. I don't know how many, and I've started a YouTube channel. If anything, I'm banging on about Offa's Dyke more than anything else. It doesn't prove that my arguments are wrong about Offa's Dyke just because I keep posting about it. It shows I'm interested in it, and it's a pertinent and timely issue. So I rejected that idea. And then the other idea that I must admit I found rather odd proposed to me was that the term Anglo-Saxon is tainted as racist. And there's no way of arguing out of it because people can find racist material using it if they Google search. Or their machine learning allows people to be fed inappropriate or racist material that contains this search word because you may have searched with it before. Well, that is an interesting point, but it's also a point that is countered by the fact that there's lots of words like black, like white, like English, that if you search for those terms, you will find racists and other extremist takes. All you have to do is be on TikTok for 10 minutes and you come across a post with an extreme or racist take on a particular issue. So I don't think there's much to be said about that. And then this individual posted a series of links and comments to other people's views on the matter, most of which I've already dealt with in the blog, and so I didn't feel it was appropriate to go through that. And some scholars I have a lot of respect for, but I find myself on a different side of an argument with, and I don't want to use Twitter to denounce or dismiss their work. I have opinions on their work, but I'm not going to share it as part of as ammunition in an argument and denounce their views. So I didn't go into that. I was then called condescending and dismissing because of those responses, which I didn't feel was particularly fair. And then it insinuated directly that any use of the term Anglo-Saxon is a racial prejudice. At which point I questioned them by a direct message. Is this what you mean? Because you're actually saying I'm racist, but because I have defended this term. And the response was, is that a threat? And I said, oh, no, it's not a threat, but you've slurred, you made a slur, you said it's equivalent to using the term Anglo-Saxon in scholarly discourse is equivalent to saying, oh, where are you from originally, like a casual, passive or lame, low-level racist statement. And I've said, I quite agree with them. Is that what they meant? And then they screen captured that and put it on social media to try and shame me in some way when I was actually being conciliatory and trying to de-escalate the situation. So I'm afraid that means that even though I had time and good dialogue with that person, they have crossed multiple lines of courtesy. And not only that, they shared my private messages, which I stand by and were perfectly fine, but they shared them on social media. In other words, they've been a complete twat. And if you're going to be a twat like that, I'm not going to continue conversations with you, and I block you. I don't need you. I don't owe you I don't owe you the right to insult me. You just go away, come up with your own opinions, talk to other people, whatever, but don't talk to me about it. Read my blog. If you don't like it, jog on. It's very simple. And I do give people a lot of time, and I'm patient, and I give people multiple opportunities to kind of position themselves. But when I see people do that, I haven't shamed this person, I haven't named them, I haven't written anything further about them, and I will, unlike some of the other people that have took it upon themselves in the recent months to denounce my work for my particular view on a particular specialist issue, I likewise haven't shared around their opinions of me. I've seen them, I have responses, but I've decided not to share those attitudes. Now, my final point for this reflection, it's quite a long reflection on the month, is related to just breaking news. And this is that the government has said that in their part of their New Deal, I don't think they understand what a New Deal is, but their New Deal post-COVID, as if we are post-COVID, because we're in the middle of a bleeding lockdown, despite what they're trying to push. Anyway, sorry, going off. As part of their New Deal is a systematic overhaul of the UK planning system. And in this regard, I've just made comments about this right now, and I do want to share with you an article by Dr. Paul Belford, who has written, Removing Archaeology and Heritage Protection from the Planning System Will Make Society Poorer. And that was published on June the 30th. And rather than me rant on about this any further, I defer expertise to Paul, who is a director of a archaeological trust and is heavily involved in the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists, and who has is one of a number of people who have immediately seen the danger of what the UK government are doing and the potential massive threat this is to the discovery of potentially, amazing archaeological sites if archaeology is ripped out or reduced in its significance within the planning and regulatory processes of building and development. And he makes a number of valid points, including the fact that the CIFA have already said that development is much more likely to be blocked by land prices, construction costs, and land banking than by planning restrictions. So they're making a point that if evidence for planning regulation preventing development is anecdotal at best and unfounded ideological rhetoric at worst. In other words, the government is playing for political points here. If they did reduce the role of planning and archaeological involvement in it, it wouldn't encourage building quicker or better. All it would do is rip out the potential for us to find and analyse nationally and internationally important archaeological sites. Instead, they'll be bulldozed out of existence. Now, I must say that I find it a bit ironic that some of the characters who have been using, shall we say, ridiculous polemic and rhetoric about ripping, returning most of the contents of some of our museums to other countries, and about statues can be ripped down here, there, and everywhere because they're not part of history, are now turning around and realizing, oh God, the centrists and right wing politicians and public see archaeologists and they don't necessarily see defenders of heritage, and that may be something we need to reflect on again before we jump on a bandwagon of supporting all all removals of historic statues that might cause offence, and jumping on the bandwagon of decolonisation of all aspects of our international collections within British museums. I'm not saying I'm against those moves. I'm just saying that we've got to be careful and nuanced in our arguments, because then suddenly something like this comes up and we're on the back foot and we don't have a united voice and we don't have a clear statement in hand. And I've always been clear in my views that yes, whatever might take a bit of postmodernism about, well, what is heritage, and is heritage really ancient things, and what does it really mean, and some of the uses and abuses of that past. I've never been one of those people that has tried to make out that the planning regulation is not important and it doesn't matter if we find things or not, and let it all go to the bulldozers because we'll just create new archaeological heritage anyway, because heritage just keeps on remaking itself, and its heritage is different and diverse. It's about people today and not about the past. So I'm well positioned in this debate because I've never tried to undermine people's concerns and care for the historic environment with casual dismissals as not understanding the issues, as some have been doing in recent weeks on social media. And I'm behind, in this instance, I'm behind CIFA, I'm behind British Archaeology, Council for British Archaeology, and behind all the other organisations in trying to present a united voice against these government ideas. And we need to watch this closely. We need to lobby where we can to make sure that archaeology isn't written out. And I haven't digested all of the points in Paul's post. But as he says at the end, one of archaeology's great strengths is its ability to question and receive historic wisdom and to throw light on these darker aspects of the country's past. These have been the bread and butter of development-driven archaeological practice, and they are also quite often the most interesting bits of archaeology that tell forgotten stories about ordinary people. So there's the opposite of the royal necrophilia I was talking about earlier. A radical reform of the planning system runs the risk of devaluing the undesignated assets that reflect these hidden stories of the poor, the dispossessed, and the powerless. That's a lovely, lovely way of putting it. It's not about the toffs, their statues, and country houses. Developer archaeology is not finding that; it's finding the stories of everyone else, and that's what archaeology is really about. It's about lots of things, but that's one of the things I think archaeology really. I'm agreeing with Paul here. I don't always, but I do in this case. I fully support the idea that archaeology is telling the stories of normal people, or ordinary people, whatever that might be, through history, from earliest times, from the Paleolithic up to the present day. So this is a very long-winded monthly roundup, but I've taken you through my blogs, my vlogs, and some of the issues where I've been most vocal on social media about, and issues that I care about deeply. And I know that means when you say anything that you're passionate about, someone's going to disagree with you and say that you're wrong. But I feel we've got to keep this conversation going. And I hope you stay with me. I hope you subscribe to YouTube. I hope you follow my blog, and we can keep having these dialogues in coming weeks, months, and years. So that's all for my June update. How is it July already? But good luck with July for everyone. And hopefully I'll see you for a next monthly roundup at the end of July.
If you've enjoyed this Archaeodeath video, why not check out the Archaeodeath blog at howardwilliamsblog.wordpress.com.